it has seriously damaged his standing in Europe and potentially around the world too. I don't know how worried they are about that. I mean, certainly for this piece, I was given a lot of access and a lot of time to speak to his close advisors. I think partly because it wouldn't hurt to build a few bridges in the British media. But I think at the moment they're very, they feel very empowered and they're sort of flexing their political muscle. I don't think they're massively concerned about what Europe thinks, because they think that the people of Europe will be with them. They think the elites of Europe are complacent and need some shock therapy, and this is what they're trying to give them.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. I'm Louis Sykes. Today we're joined by Josh Glancy, the Sunday Times' news review editor. Josh, welcome.
Good afternoon.
You've been speaking to friends and associates of JD Vance for your article in the Times this weekend. Could you just start with what you've learnt about this figure?
Sure. I think I decided to do this piece, which is really a profile of JD Vance in power, because I felt that he was becoming a bit of a cartoon baddie in the British mind, and that he was being seen as somewhere between a fool and a lunatic. And my own experience of JD Vance goes back to 2017, really, when I met him and did a very in-depth interview with him for the Sunday Times magazine. I got to know him a fair bit then, and I've always followed his career quite carefully since. And my sense is that we were starting to view Vance as someone who really had just thrown all his ideals overboard to just get behind Trump and basically sacrificed everything he cared about on the altar of his own ambition. My sense was that there was something a little bit more complex going on, and that actually he'd had quite a sincere ideological conversion and had been on a real journey. And I wanted to trace that journey, why he thinks what he does, why he appears to have got behind Trump so completely, and to really put him as a 3D figure in the British mind and not as a kind of 1D bad guy. That doesn't necessarily mean he's a better or worse person. I think in some ways that the full 3D Vance is perhaps more troubling for some people, because he's actually a very much, I think, sincere in his beliefs and in his attitudes. But it does sort of add quite a lot of depth and texture to the man who appears and has stirred a lot of outrage in the last few weeks with his various comments and remarks regarding sort of international situation and Ukraine and transatlantic alliance and all that sort of thing.
And am I right to think that there is a very different idea of JD Vance in the European and American mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. There were three incidents or moments really that cemented JD Vance's, I would say, plummeting reputation in the European mind. One was a speech he gave at the Munich Security Conference in February to all the assorted panjandrums and politicians, where he really berated Europe for its failure to spend properly on defence and for its failure, in his mind, to uphold values such as free speech, to maintain control of its own borders, that sort of thing. Then there was the now infamous Oval Office sit down with President Zelensky and President Trump. And Vance, you speak to people around him and they say, oh, well, Zelensky started it. Lots of other people feel differently. Either way, he really went for Zelensky hard in a way that we're not used to seeing in an environment like that. This was not the behavior of a traditional statesman. And it shocked a lot of people. This is a wartime leader, a hero to many, being dressed down, and many felt bullied in the Oval Office. And then the final comment was when he talked to a Fox News interviewer about random countries that haven't fought a war in 30 or 40 years, looking after the security of Ukraine. And this was in response to a question about European peacekeeping. So it did rather feel as though he was talking about Britain, and that's certainly how many people took it. And I think that really was offensive to a lot of people in this country, because Britain has fought alongside America in its wars of the 21st century. and many of our compatriots have died and shed blood in those wars. So he has been adamant that he did not mean Britain when he was talking about that, but it was certainly taken that way.
And how worrying are some of those controversies for the Trump administration? I mean, how significant is his role as vice president?
So I don't think they're worried at all. Maybe they should be, but they're not. I think that certainly Vance's team was very encouraged by the Oval Office encounter with Zelensky, and they were encouraged by the reaction to the Munich speech. I think they did acknowledge that the random countries comment was clumsy and open to misinterpretation. That was about as far as they're willing to go on that. But no, I think they're encouraged, and I think they see things like Germany announcing hundreds of billions of dollars of defense spending, Britain upping its defense spending, meetings being convened by worried Macron and Starmer, and they think good. They think we've put a rocket up them, and it took some intemperate language to really stir Europe out of its torpor and its complacency. So no, I don't think they're worried at all. I think Vance is playing a really interesting role in the Trump administration. He's the most visible and influential vice president, I would say, since Dick Cheney, who had a very different worldview to Vance, but was very prominent, particularly on issues of diplomacy and foreign affairs.
He's certainly more visible.
Yeah, he's I mean, just the fact that Trump had him in that Oval Office and allowed him to take the lead in that moment was extraordinary. Very different to Trump's first term, where that was not the case for VP Mike Pence or anyone else, frankly. Trump seems quite relaxed about having him on the front foot. He left him in charge of all his cabinet pick confirmations in the Senate, which were successful. I think that showed a lot of trust in Vance, and Vance delivered for him on that. And I think if you talk to people in and around Trump world and in the broader MAGA movement, they see him as really almost a nailed-on successor to Trump. Obviously, many things could happen before now in the next election, but that's how they see it.
And there is a theory, in American politics that foreign affairs just don't win votes in the US. They don't boost your polling numbers at all. Do you think JD Vance is a man who's mastered this idea of you always play to your domestic audience?
Well, I think it's certainly the case that when he was having a go at Zelensky like that, he would have guessed correctly, as polling showed, that the majority of Americans were with him. That's not just Trump hardcore voters, that's actually a majority of Americans. So he knew his audience for that one, certainly, and it was primarily domestic, and it certainly cemented him in the eyes of many who agreed with that worldview and felt Zelensky actually was due a bit of a dressing down. I don't think it will do his domestic political status any harm at all. It has seriously damaged his standing in Europe and potentially around the world too. I don't know how worried they are about that. I mean, certainly for this piece, I was given a lot of access and a lot of time to speak to his close advisors. I think partly because it wouldn't hurt to build a few bridges in the British media. But I think at the moment they're very, they feel very empowered and they're sort of flexing their political muscle. I don't think they're massively concerned about what Europe thinks, because they think that the people of Europe will be with them. They think the elites of Europe are complacent and need some shock therapy, and this is what they're trying to give them.
And so they're not worried at the moment about taking this kind of America first mindset too far on the world stage. I mean, he certainly seems to have spooked most, if not all now, of the US's quite close allies.
Yeah, well, we're talking just a few hours after the latest Vance comments that have stirred a lot of anger, where he described Denmark as not a reliable ally. I saw someone post online that just how many Danish soldiers had died fighting with the Americans in the war on terror. It was quite a few, certainly per capita. So lack of gratitude, lack of respect does appear to be there. But I think, again, Vance isn't that bothered. I think that he thinks that Trump administration wants Greenland. These are big issues that are going to define the 21st century, spheres of influence, China, Russia, and Europe needs to get on board. That America's been paying Europe's security fees, if you like, for decades now. And it's, again, time for some shock therapy. And if that involves the odd intemperate comment and the odd ruffled feather and a little bit less respect than and diplomatic language than the Europeans are used to, well, tough, I think, is how they view it.
And so presumably he will have seen the massive boost in European defence spending as an American and a Trump, if not a Vance win then.
Certainly, the line I heard several times from people around him is budget is strategy. And they will believe Europe when they see the money being spent and the arms being bought and the armies being built up. So at the moment, I think they feel that it's early days. You know, one official said to me that a couple of years ago, Germany announced a big shift in defense spending after the Ukraine war broke out, and their army is smaller than it was then. So they are a little bit skeptical about European promises. I think fundamentally they're not certain, they're not convinced that Europe has the will and the determination to really commit to this kind of thing. I think they're worried that Europe is actually in some sort of death spiral and doesn't have the vigor. I think they have the very civilizational will. This is their view, not mine. But so I think they'll believe it when they see it, is the view on Europe. I think the early signs are quite encouraging from their perspective, that there has been a shift, particularly in Germany, which is really the big economy that is, you know, so little German money has been spent on defense relative to their economic strength in the last few decades for lots of obvious historical reasons. I think that's the real potential game changer for Europe. But again, I think they remain a little bit skeptical about what this looks like in 2 to 5 years' time.
And we spoke a little before about the role Vance plays in Trump's cabinet. He's really now being touted as the future of Trumpism. I mean, like you say, 4 years is a long time. He's at the moment the vice president, of course. That sets him up in the right position for it. But is it true then that he was once this kind of never Trumper guy, as I believe the quote goes? Or is that just a case of comments being taken out of context?
No, he wasn't ever Trumper, really. I don't know if I can't remember if he actually used that phrase or not, but his language was very much never Trump. I mean, God expects more of us, I think was one phrase he used. He said that Trump could theoretically become America's Hitler. Even when I asked him in sort of April, May 2017, what do you think so far? He says, I'm not convinced. You know, Trump is articulating the problems that I agree with his diagnosis, but I do not think he's the man to lead us out of this. I think his conversion came later and was quite sincere, but happened over quite a long period of time. And we can talk about why that took place. But it's certainly the case that now his conversion is complete, and he is viewed as the successor, and that was one of the reasons he was picked, and why Trump's son Don Jr., who's very much ideologically MAGA, if you like, and good friends with Vance, was very keen for him to be the vice president, because they didn't want another establishment Republican, old school Republican, getting in their way. They wanted someone who was on board, could be trusted, would be a standard bearer for what they believe.
And of course, we all know about JD Vance's upbringing, his growing up in poverty, his book Hillbilly Elegy, of course. But what can you tell us about the political rise of JD Vance?
Well, the Hillbilly Elegy was the absolute game-changing moment for him. It put him on the national and international stage, frankly. It was a runaway bestseller. I mean, it sold and sold and sold. And the moment he did it, this being America, the question was, well, is he going to run? You know, they always, whenever anyone makes it that big in American life, a political life, is he going to run? And the answer was yes. I mean, he was still weighing it up when I asked him that in 2017, partly because he didn't see a path to being in the party of Donald Trump. He was too skeptical. So he had to get on board with that. And once he did that, yes, he was absolutely going to run. He did run for the Senate in 2021, won a seat in Ohio. He had the backing of Peter Thiel, the Silicon Valley billionaire, who he met while he was still a law student at Yale. Thiel's backed him all the way. He's a political patron. He's also a sort of intellectual influence. Vance has worked for Teal. Teal has donated a lot of money to his Ohio Senate campaign. So they are tight, and that obviously helped him. Teal was one of the first billionaires really to back Trump, particularly from Silicon Valley. So that carries a lot of weight. And so he won a Senate seat in 2021, and he was quite an effective senator. He's very dynamic. He's pugnacious, as we've seen, combative even, but he's very, very dynamic, and he's got a real cadre of people around him, very active coterie of intellectuals he talks to, a lot of young conservative guys who are really fired up about changing the course of American history, have kind of gathered around him. There's a kind of court of JD Vance. And so he was quite an effective senator, and he reached across the aisle on issues that to sort of left-wing senators like Elizabeth Warren on economic issues, because he is arguably, depending on how you skin the cat, economically left-wing. And so he was a pretty interesting senator, and could have gone on like that for some time. But then the vice presidential nomination hove into view with Trump, and Vance was well positioned for it, because in 2021, when he asked Trump for his endorsement for the Ohio Senate race, he went to Mar-a-Lago, he kissed the ring, possibly actually kissed the ring. I wasn't there. Peter Thiel went with him, and he got the nomination, and that was a huge deal. It helped him obviously win that seat, but it also was a signal that what he'd said in the past had been forgiven, and that he was on the team now. And that meant that when it came time for the Veep stakes, he was well positioned. Again, he had the support of Donald Trump Jr., the Silicon Valley guys, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel backed him, and he acts as a bit of a bridge between the kind of MAGA base and some of those white working class voters in the Midwest, and also the Silicon Valley tech guys who like him because they know him. And so he was well positioned, and he got the nomination.
And that conversion, as it were, from Republican to Trump Republican, is that just inevitable for especially newer Republicans, or was there something ideological that changed in JD Vance?
It's a great question. I think it's the question in some ways about him. I think the answer is both. I think that clearly his ambition played a role, and I think took him further and faster towards Trumpism than he would have gone otherwise. I think that he was pretty transparent about that, really. I mean, in an interview to Time magazine in 2021, he said that Trump is the leader of this party. He's the guy who the voters want. And if I want to do anything in politics, I have to suck it up and accept that. Suck it up was quite a sort of telling phrase there. He's going to have to accept Trump, warts and all. And this was February 2021 when he went for that nomination. That's just a month after January 6th. So, yeah, he was willing to suck that up. So that's the kind of more transactional, ambitious side of it. The more sincere ideological side of it is that on the issues he really cares about a lot, or some of them, Trump did somewhat deliver in his first term. So there was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of noise, there were a lot of undignified rows. But some of the issues JD Vance really cares about, he cares about abortion. He's Catholic convert, and having a conservative justices on the Supreme Court who overturned federal abortion, Roe v. Wade. Trump delivered on that. He put those judges there, and they overturned Roe v. Wade. He cares about stopping American military adventurism, America not being the world's policeman and not spending blood and treasure abroad, everywhere from Vietnam to Iraq, trying to promote its values and foreign policy around the world. Well, Trump was not a military adventurist in any way. And he cares about restricting immigration, getting control of the borders. He sees that immigration is a threat to, in his view, the working class way of life, working class wages, and that basically big American corporations just want to import cheap labor across the border. He wants to put an end to that. Well, Trump did get immigration down through rhetoric and changing policies at times as well. So there was some delivery there. So Vance was able to say, well, hang on, this guy does actually bring home the bacon for me, as well as all the madness and the chaos. But I also think he responded to the events of the Trump era, and we could be talking about the Russiagate scandal, which ultimately didn't bring him down and was felt by a lot of not just conservatives, but to be, fabricated. The attempt to end the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, which a lot of conservatives felt was deeply unfair. It was the unearthing of an allegation of sexual assault from his youth. JD Vance's wife, Usha, was a clerk for Brett Kavanaugh, and they just felt that was they felt that it was really amoral political warfare, I think, from liberals, from Democrats. And of course, everything that happened in 2020, the sort of what you might call the peak woke moment and the kind of Black Lives Matter post George Floyd era, and I think Vance recoiled from that very strongly as well. So you have, on the one hand, Trump delivering some policies that he cares about. On the other hand, the way that the Democrats and the liberal media went about trying to destroy Trump, and you put those together, and you have his own journey starts to make a bit more sense. And he converts to Catholicism in 2018 as well. He's searching for a kind of deeper. He's searching for a kind of deeper, what he would call a post-liberal way of looking at the world that's much more rooted in ideas of family and faith, and rejects the kind of freedoms and hollowness of liberalism as he sees it. That's the more kind of intellectual journey he goes on. So you put all that together and add a huge dollop of ambition in there too, and that's where he reaches the point where he is willing to suck up to Donald Trump as well, I suspect, and go in that direction.
And just finally, Josh, as we don't have too much time left, how much does he represent the younger face of Trumpism in 2025, especially compared to what was a political movement that was more appealing to older people in 2016?
It's certainly true that Trump himself won a lot of young people's votes in the 2024 election, particularly young men, partly by going on all the various bro podcasts, partly, I think, because of a reaction against things like woke and Me Too and that sort of thing among some young men. Vance obviously is a millennial. He marinates deeply on online political discourse. He's still on Twitter or X replying to historians and policy analysts, even when he probably has a lot of other things to do. He is a young face of Trumpism, and he does represent the future to a lot of people. So yeah, I do think that, and there's a lot of young conservatives working for him. It's, they all kind of, someone mentioned to me that a lot of people work from Smoke, which is a small detail, but actually gives you a sense of, there's a slightly countercultural vibe around it. It's a little bit rebellious. It's a little bit edgy. And there is an energy around Vance and his court that is quite powerful. But a lot of the young people also, they like Trump. Trump's old, but they find him funny. And he's a kind of master of new media. So age is only one factor.
Well, Josh Glancy, thank you very much for joining me today on the Trump Report.
Thanks for having me.